Welcome everyone. So I'm super excited for you in this session because we're going to really do a deep dive on what is the process of restoring not only your own health, but in that process, how do you restore faith in yourself and in humanity? So all of you listeners at this amazing Global Health Summit, I honor you for being here and being on this session because I believe this tiny seed that you're about to get will grow into one of the biggest plants with the biggest impact on the world that you can actually imagine. And so while that sounds unbelievable, at the end of this session, you can understand how this is possible and how you have infinitely more power and more influence than you currently realize. And so in case you don't know who I am, my name is Dr. Steve, and I've been in this space of healing humans for the last 20 plus years. And a lot of people ask me, well, how did I get here? Right? How do I get to speak on stages and speak at events and run global corporations? And I explained to them, well, one, I'm blessed and honored. And two, it's from a series of what I call magical breadcrumbs in my life. And you'll see later in this session why this is so important. Right? And I'll explain to you that my first magical breadcrumb was in fact from the fact that I grew up dirt poor. When we moved from Taiwan, which is where I was born, to America when I was 8 years old, we literally picked from the trash for our furniture. We lived in a trailer park where the building I was in was just big enough for a bed, right? And just enough to walk around the bed, and that's it. There was no bathroom, no kitchen, no other room, just the bed. In fact, whenever we had to go to the bathroom and eat, we had to go across the way to another trailer where my grandparents owned and use their facilities, right? I mean, literally, I was like grateful for winter because we can actually drink milk, and we would keep the milk and cold food outside because we didn't have a refrigerator, right? And so I was very, very grateful. And it was a great time for me to practice gratitude, right? I was very grateful for the little things that we had because we had nothing. And so from doing that, I will say that I knew something was missing, right? So, I mean, my mom worked like 80 hours a week. I barely saw her. And so I found comfort in sort of that chaos in playing a lot of video games, literally like 16 hours a day. Because back then, this is like 30 plus years ago, you couldn't pause video games like you could do now. So if you start a video game and, unless you finished it, you got to start over. So I would finish it, thus these 16 to 20 hours of video games. And so the entire day, as I sat there and played video games on certain days, I would basically just put a bag of Oreo cookies next to me, some water, and that was my entire days of nutrition. Oreo cookies, sometimes Chips Ahoy, especially the soft kind, it's amazing, and water and video games. And so you can imagine from doing that for years, that would not produce a very healthy child, right? So I was very unhealthy. I had horrible allergies. I was so weak. Another magical breadcrumb is during high school, freshman year, when they do the presidential fitness test, I couldn't do a pull-up. And when they did the mile run, I got lapped. Now just keep in mind, there's only 4 laps, right, in the mile run. I got lapped, right? That's how horrible health and poor shape I was in. And so that was my second magical breadcrumb because I kind of realized this is deathly embarrassing. And so from that high level of embarrassment and the desire to not feel that ever again, I started my journey of learning about health. And so I started realizing that actually it was more than just about nutrition and exercise, the typical stuff. At least when I was young, I had some awareness that how we thought was at the foundation of our health. And so my first study when I was 14 was into the study of the mind, right? My first book that I read was called Psycho-Cybernetics. It's basically a book on how do you program the subconscious mind. And so I started with that, and I started to reprogram my thinking process. And so then I started to do the typical improved nutrition. I used to bring my own food to school once I realized how unhealthy school lunch was. And I started to exercise and do all kinds of different things for my health. So that started me on this amazing path of studying how a human system operates and how do we optimize and heal that system, right? So I went on and I got a degree in biomechanics from Penn State, and I got my master's and my doctorate in physical therapy here in Heidelberg in Pennsylvania. And I learned a lot about health. In fact, during that time, I also taught physiology, which is chemically how the body works, to doctors at Rutgers here in New Jersey, where I'm at. And I learned a lot during that process, but it wasn't until the third magical breadcrumb that led me to doing what I'm doing here and why I am speaking to you. You see, that third magical breadcrumb was when my wife, 14 years ago, almost died. She literally went from completely fine to within a week being in the hospital for a week, being fed through an IV because she couldn't hold down any food or water. And so the doctors diagnosed her with ulcerative colitis. Literally, her intestines were bleeding. They were like melting in the inside. And so they basically offer us a choice. Either go on medications, 2 medications for the rest of her life, or have her suffer like this. And so at least by then, I already knew enough where I was like, this can't be the way. This can't be the only possible path. And so I reached out to a friend of mine that I met when I was at Penn State, and I knew he was doing some pretty amazing out-of-the-box stuff. And to make a long story short, she went from suffering and losing 20% of her body weight within a week or two, like almost dying. She weighed like 96 pounds, literally skin and bones, to being fully cured in 6 weeks. Right? And so essentially, how was she cured? Well, he did more advanced testing that was available, figured out the root cause of why she had the symptoms of ulcerative colitis, and then we got rid of the root cause. Right? And the root cause in her case was a specific strain of bacteria that basically was causing all the damage. And now that seems so logical and obvious, the best hospital in Pennsylvania did not do those tests. All they did was stick a camera in her butt and go, yep, it's bleeding, so let's take these medications, right? And so that really woke me up. It really helped me realize, oh my God, our entire system of supporting a human called healthcare isn't quite working. Right? And so I started, this was 14 years ago, so for the last 14 years, I've looked at so many different ways of how a human functions. And so in this session, you're going to get a framework that I developed that fully allows a person to be restored. And you're going to get not only information, because information is somewhat useless unless you act on it, you're going to get specific actionables that you're going to do to actually restore your system, right? Now, granted, typically I share this in an entire week's worth of lectures and courses, and now I only have a certain amount of time. Don't worry. At the end of this session, you're going to get actionables and a gift from me. It's a pay it forward from me because I saw my wife suffer, and I don't want any human to ever suffer like that, ever. You're going to get a resource to actually get an entire full course of this topic for you for absolutely no cost, right? And so, because in this course, in this session, I want you to fully, deeply pay attention to the context of what I'm about to say, and then you're going to get the actionables. Don't worry about, hey, am I going to get enough for this to work? You're going to get it all, right? And so, before we get to the actionables, I find that when actionables are just given, and people don't understand the context of why, the motivation to do the actionable is very low. And so before I get to the actionables, I'm going to give you some context, right? Because if you understand the landscape, the context of what's happening, you will infinitely be more motivated to act on the actionables. And ultimately, it's acting on the actionables on a very consistent basis that gets the habits developed for you to become a person of health, right? And when I say health, I don't mean just being healthy. I mean mental health, physical health in every which way. And you're going to learn the huge ripple effects of that, right? Because for me, planting the seed in you allows this massive tree to grow that has impact on humanity. Because I believe many of us do not fully realize just how influential and just how powerful we can be. So you will realize this at the end of this session. Okay, so what is the context? Just to give you some backdrop. Since 1976 in America, and this is happening worldwide, we are living in one of the most toxic times in human history. And I'll talk about toxins from different perspectives. So in this case, we'll start with biological or chemical toxic, right? And so I'll give you some data. Since 1976, 82,000 new chemicals have been introduced. And basically that's saying 82,000 new drugs, right, have been made, right, just like a new drug. And they've been put in your mouth, on your skin, and they've had you breathe it with almost no testing on human safety. About 300 out of 82,000 have human safety testing, right? That's unfathomable if you think about it. And so the reason this is, in the drug industry, they do have to go through FDA approval to do studies to make sure it's safe. In the industrial chemical perspective, keep in mind, when they invent an industrial chemical, it's a drug. It's the same thing, right? No different. It's just that this drug, this chemical, is being put in your soap, your shampoo, your deodorant. It's on the clothes that you buy. It's definitely in a car that you're rubbing your arms on, every fabric that you're touching. The new furniture that you buy has these chemicals on it. It's everywhere. It's in the food. It's sprayed on your food, but yet they don't need any human safety testing, all right? And so I'll give you some more definitive data because that's a little bit too broad. In Europe, there's 1,016 chemicals they've identified as being so cancerous they've banned it all because they're typically in soap, shampoo, lotion, and personal care products and makeup. In America, all 1,016 are allowed. Yep. There are 76 pesticides all other countries have banned. In America, all 76 are allowed. And so what are the effects of some of these pesticides? Well, I'm going to give you one of the more popular ones. A study found that 1 drop of this pesticide in 1 billion drops of water, that's like a lake, is enough to turn a male frog into a female frog. Yep. And so it's very hormone toxic, very estrogen, right? Very female-like. That's how it's able to turn a male frog into a female frog. And so this is what's happening to us. We're being exposed to chemicals. And in one of my businesses where we actually can fully test people's blood and people's urine, their pee, we're finding off the charts levels of many toxins, right? And this is confirmed. Last year they did a study where they tested a bunch of average Americans, and they found between 300 to 700 industrial chemicals on average in an adult and 200 industrial chemicals in a newborn baby, right? And so that's a lot of chemicals. And so that is the state, the chemical toxin state of the world right now. So, but there's also mental toxicity, right? Like if you're watching this and you're, 40, 50 years old and plus, just think, the news now versus the news 10 years ago, 20 years ago, and 30 years ago is completely different, right? We're seeing much more violence, right, in the news and violence in the movies. We're just being exposed to not only more data, that data has infinitely more violence, fear, anxiety, stress, chaos, uncertainty embedded into the message. It just wasn't the case 40, 50, 60 years ago. It's every decade it's become exponentially higher. And that's sort of the mental toxicity that is affecting humans. And what are the effects of this, right? Well, we can see statistics, 1/3 of Americans have prediabetes or diabetes, right? That means 1/3 of Americans have a blood sugar issue. There are studies showing 1/3 of Americans are obese, 40% are overweight. Cancer rates are predicted to be, in certain countries, like in Ireland, 50% incidence of cancer, right? That means if you live in Ireland, in your lifetime, you have a 50% chance of getting cancer. In America, depending upon male or female, it's around 42%. And it's increasing, right? And so this is the context. And so if you think about it, when we go into healthcare, right, when we go to the doctor, the system is filled with loving doctors, right? Your doctor does care about you. No child grows up to high school, says, hey, I'm going to go to medical school to not be affected. Of course, you go to medical school because you want to help people. And so, but the system is what's currently ineffective, right? Because the system, to give you context of healthcare, when you go to your doctor, just think, when you get your blood test to see how healthy you are, right, on a yearly basis, that test hasn't been updated in your entire lifetime, right? It's been the same test. And so, but look at technology. The rest of technology has grown exponentially, but yet the test to discern are you healthy is exactly the same. And interestingly, if you think about it, let's say you drink a 2 liter of soda, right, every day. I'm just exaggerating, but let's say you do. You drink 2 liters of soda every day, or you eat lots and lots of white bread and drink lots of juice. Basically, you eat lots of sugar and refined carbohydrates on a daily basis for a decade. Well, you can imagine what your doctor would say if you went to the doctor, right? So your doctor would say, wow, your blood sugar is high, you have diabetes. So let's put you on these drugs for your diabetes. Imagine if they did something else, right? Because when they say you have diabetes, is already imparting that you have this thing. It's a part of you, right? That's sort of the worst way to think about it. A little bit less worse would be if they simply said you have the symptoms of diabetes, right? That's very different than you have diabetes. You have the symptoms of diabetes, right? You can, right? One is a part of you. Now you just have the symptoms of it, but you don't have the thing, right? I'll give you an analogy. Imagine you have a child. The child comes home from school and gets an F or a D on a report card. You would just say, oh, next time you can study more. You can be more prepared. You would never say to your child, you have stupidity, right? But the doctors will say you have blank. Ultimately, the best thing would be, hey, you have currently less ability to manage your blood sugar because for the last 10 years, you've been eating too much sugar. If they worded that way, of course, you would go, oh, this is about my behavior and my choices, which is where the root causes are. Then you would change your root causes. See, the system doesn't frame it this way because this is a cure. This does not feed the system. Right? I want you to understand the context. One diabetic patient is worth $250,000 lifetime into the industrial medical complex. Do you think the industrial medical complex wants to cure it? Right? And so now this may sound surprising, shocking. You might even think like this is conspiracy theory. This is just business, right? Because if they were to want to cure it, instead of $250,000 per patient, which if you do the math, right, there's 300 million people in America, 100 million, 1/3 have it. 100 million people times $250,000 is a lot, right? $2.5 trillion. That's a lot of money, right? And so what can we do? Well, now that you understand the context, we're going to talk about what are the framework. How do we actually find root causes, right? And so at Ammortal, which is one of the companies that I have, we developed this framework on how do you actually identify the root causes of people's symptoms, right? Just keep in mind that if you're watching this and you've been labeled by a doctor with a diagnosis, I want you to immediately, right now, reframe, reword it, right? In other words, if your doctor has told you you have high blood pressure, you can at least, right, mini practice, at least say, I'm currently experiencing the symptoms of high blood pressure. If you've been labeled diabetes, I'm currently experiencing the symptoms of diabetes. If you have arthritis, I'm currently experiencing the symptoms of arthritis. You can apply this to any diagnosis, right? So that is at least one step away from you have, which literally embeds that in you. At the end of this session, I'm hoping you realize, let's go all the way the other way. You will now frame it as, oh, it's from these choices, these behavior, and these things, all right? So to get you there, I'm gonna give you the framework. There are 5 things on how we can find the root cause of symptoms, right? And those 5 are the mind, the mechanical body, how we move, the biological body, which is the chemical body, that's 3. There's the environment, right, which is what's around you. And lastly, there's the energy, right? Energy just has to do with frequency and vibrations, right? So I'm going to walk through all of these 5 elements as it relates to your immunity, specifically because immunity is very important right now, given what's happening in the world. Anything that you can do to optimize your immunity directly will minimize your chance of being seriously ill, given what's going on, okay? So let's apply this to immunity. The first one we'll go through is, let's just pick one. Let's pick the environment since we talked about the context, right? So what's around you directly affects your health, of course, right? I'll exaggerate so you can kind of conceptualize this. Let's say you do everything that you can to be healthy, but you live next to a nuclear plant that's leaking, you're not going to be healthy, right? So I live in New Jersey. There's literally maps that you can pull up online because it shows certain neighborhoods are built on what are called Superfund sites. It just means they're basically built on garbage, right? And if you look at the stats, just in New Jersey, if you live here, there's a 33% higher chance incidence of breast cancer, right, compared to any other state, right? Because New Jersey actually is filled with a lot of toxins, right? And so in the water that we drink, right, when you plug your zip code in, and you can do this, right, on your own, if you just type in EWG, Edward, William, Gale, EWG.org, and you type in water, they have a database where you can plug in your zip code, and it will tell you basically how toxic your water is. It will show you all the different toxins in your water. So I can tell you, in my area, there are 30 industrial toxins in the water, and 15 of 30 exceed health limits. In other words, there are 15 chemicals that they know are higher than what's allowed that causes cancer, illness, and disease. Right? And so in your environment, the number one recommendation I recommend is to test your water, or at least look it up online, and then take action to filter your water. Now, you might be thinking, hey, it's okay, I drink bottled water. Well, if you look at the studies, bottled water is more toxic than tap water, right? Mainly because the bottled water industry is not regulated. There are certain bottled waters, when it was tested, especially some of the generic ones, had way more chemicals than tap water. And two, even the artisan waters, right, it comes in a plastic bottle, and that plastic chemical gets into the water, and it causes all kinds of cancers and stuff like that, okay? So bottled water is actually more toxic than tap water. Your best source of water is to filter your tap water. Now, you have some options. If you own your own home, you want to get what's called a central line filter. And again, at the end of this, you get access to a course where I show you what to get. So don't worry about the details. I just want you to understand the concept and be motivated to act on it. So if you own your own home, your best bet is to get a central line filter, because it is the best quality water, and every drop of water coming into your house is now filtered, right? And also the expense of that is way less than bottled water, and way less than a second best option, which is the under the sink filter, right? So if you don't own your home, which means you cannot install a central line filter, you're going to want an under the sink filtration system, right? So they're typically $150 to $300, right? And so you get what's called a reverse osmosis one. It's the best one. And so you would put that under the sink. Now that takes care of your drinking water. However, you're still going to bathe and shower in toxic water. And so you're going to want to get a shower head filter to install on your shower head and shower with filtered water, right? Because you're inhaling the steam of those chemicals. It's going in your skin, right? It's still very toxic, right? And so those two things on your water makes a tremendous, profound influence in your health. I'll give you interesting stats. We have tested a bunch of people in the Baltimore, Washington, D.C. area, and we're finding off the charts levels of rocket fuel in their body. Rocket fuel, right? And what we did for the research, it's because it's in their water system. And these are all my friends who are entrepreneurs, who are very on top of their health. They're, drinking filtered water and all that stuff, but they didn't get a central line filter. They didn't filter it enough, and they were thinking that when they're drinking their bottled water, that was being safe, but yet they're bathing and showering and touching rocket fuel, right? And so very important for you to take care of your water supply, right? That's the number one thing from the environment perspective. Your water supply is huge, okay? So now let's pick one. Let's go to the mechanical body, right? Your mechanical self. So interestingly, 20 years when I first started doing physical therapy and healing people mechanically in my clinic here in New Jersey, 5% of the people at most had tightness in the front of their hips 20 years ago. Now it's 99.999%, right? Exponential increase in the amount of tightness in the front of the hip. Now, when I talk about this, people say, well, it's because people are sitting more. Well, I looked into the research. We're not sitting that much more in the last 20 years, right? Maybe an hour more. An hour more sitting wouldn't account for an exponential 20+ fold increase in tightness of this. We'll get into why it's tight when we get to the biology, but from a mechanical perspective, what's happening is, especially with phones, especially what's causing this tightness, our bodies are being pulled more and more forward. And every degree that we go forward puts more pressure into our body. More pressure means more work that our muscles have to use on a day-to-day basis for you just to live. More work from your muscles means wasted energy and more pressure in your entire skeletal system. Right? In other words, think of it as most people are walking around now as if there's an 80-pound brick on top of their head every day. You can imagine an 80-pound brick on your head is not going to be pro-health, right? Sort of anti-health. So the mechanical thing that I recommend is doing a stretch to stretch those muscles, right? It's a super simple stretch. It's also known as like the warrior pose in yoga, right? So I'll give you a side view. You stand in a lunge position, you keep the back knee straight, you lunge forward, and you reach up and you arch your back like this, right? And you want to hold that for about 5 deep breaths, and you just turn to the other side and do the same motion. Or you can just switch legs, of course, right? Because you want to switch both sides. And so you want to do that one single stretch throughout the day, right? When you first start doing this, I recommend doing it every 2 to 3 hours. It takes, a minute or two, not even, but you want to do it frequently throughout the day. And the reason is if you stretch a muscle out, if you don't stretch it again in the next 4 hours, it fully retightens. Thus, you want to do it high frequency, right? However, you don't want to do it high intensity. If you lunge forward so hard where you're feeling pain in these areas, it means you're going too hard, right? So you want to back off, keep the stretch intensity medium, but use high frequency to get the benefits of that stretch, right? That will start to restore your mechanical position. It's like taking 80 pounds off of your head. That is incredible, right, for your health. And later on, you'll understand when we get to sort of the mind energy part, what's inside of us controls what's outside of us. And this will be very important later. Hold on to that thought, right? And so far we've covered the environment, we've covered the mechanical self, right? So let's go to the mind, right? So when it comes to the mind, essentially it's how you're perceiving the world, your external circumstances, and the words you're using to communicate within yourself, right? And so when it comes to the mind, I have 2 actionables for you. One is you're going to practice mindfulness practice. And I have a mindfulness practice that is so easy, anyone can do it, okay? And all you do is you take your index finger and you wiggle it 100 times, right? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and you count to 100. What's happening right now is as you're wiggling your finger and you're counting, make sure you count out loud, your mind is not thinking about future or past. It's in the moment, which essentially you're practicing mindfulness, right? And so that takes your brain out of worrying, right, which is future, or depression, anxiety, which is the past, right? And so it takes you in the moment. Super easy. I do not recommend most people who have never practiced any mindfulness to jump right to meditation, right? Because the expectation of meditation is like not thinking and emptying your mind, and people who feel like they can't do that, they give up, they go, I can't meditate. Well, I recommend starting with just wiggling your finger. Now, if after your wiggling finger practice for a month, you now have enough moments for a month throughout the day to practice being in the now, then you can transition to guided meditation, right? Like you listen to an app, someone's talking to you, and you do that for a month or 2. And after that, you can go into what's called traditional meditation, right? Which is you sit, you let your thoughts come and go without judging. The analogy I use that I've read, it's not mine, I'm just borrowing it, is meditation's like watching a mosquito land on you and bite you and leave, but you never scratch the itch, right? So it's like watching and observing your thoughts come, but you never interact with the thoughts, right? That's sort of the end stage practice of this. But in the beginning, start by wiggling your finger. So that's one actionable practice. And so you might want to do this 3 to 10 times a day. It's up to you. Minimum of 3 up to 10 times a day. I do recommend switching fingers. I actually had a patient who is very, very diligent, very type A, and she used the same index finger every day, and she started to get soreness. She started to get soreness in the index finger. So you might want to switch. Maybe use a toe sometimes. Maybe use a different finger, right? And so that's one actionable. I'll give you the other actionable when it comes to your mind, which essentially is be very aware of the words that you are speaking and thinking, right? And so again, I have an entire course on word use, but in this session, I just want you to be aware of 2 words, right? Super simple 2 words to start your beginning practice. And the 2 words are I get to versus have to, right? So you can imagine if you got up each day and you said, I have to wake up, I have to brush my teeth, I have to get dressed, I have to get in a car, I have to go to the office, I have to go food shopping, I have to, right? What that would feel like. Imagine, right now, take time and imagine, take a deep breath, and imagine a week of that, a month of that, a year of that, versus I get to wake up, I get to brush my teeth, I get to put on my clothes, I get to get in a car, I get to go, so on and so forth. And what that feels like, right? It's a very, very, very different thought process, right? And so one would be, wow, I'm so grateful I get to do all these things, the same things. And one is I have to, as if it's a burden. And so you can imagine just switching have to get completely switches your level of stress and your level of anxiety, right? We're speaking root causes. Because most people who talk about reducing stress, well, the stress comes from some root causes, which is our language use. And again, in the full course, there's a deeper practice of our previous experiences also strongly influence our thinking process, which leads to these stress levels. So if we're just reducing stress, we're still just simply addressing the symptoms, the root causes, the words we use, in our previous experiences and the stories we have assigned to the previous experiences. Again, beyond the scope of this session, but don't worry, you actually get full access to that course as a part of this Pay It Forward. Okay, so that is the mind. Now, let's go to the next section, which is biology, right? So our chemical cells. When it comes to our chemical cells, this is, tying back to why people are so tight here now, right? Well, there's a 20-fold increase. Again, I kind of talked about how toxic we are. What's more importantly, interestingly, is at least in America, glyphosate, also known as Roundup, which is a weed killer, they're spraying on everything. It's in all grains, right? And so as an actionable in America, I would highly recommend greatly limit your intake of any grains, all of them, right? Doesn't matter if it's like wheat or oats or any grains, even if it says organic. I used to give my kids those cute little Auntie Annie's organic bunnies, and then when they were tested, they had tons of Roundup in it, right? Cheerios, there's more Roundup than vitamin A in Cheerios. And so pasta or Roundup, right? And so if it has any grains, if it's grown, especially in America, forget genetically modified and all that stuff. That has its own unfortunate effects, but the Roundup is huge, right? And so if you're gonna eat any grains, I would see if you can get like quinoa that's imported. It's grown maybe in South America. That would be my recommendation. Or flour that's imported maybe from Italy would be amazing. I would really try to avoid any grains that's in America. Huge actionable. The reason is when you eat Roundup, it basically causes lots of inflammation in your intestines. In your intestines, when it gets inflamed, here are two interesting effects you may not be aware of. One, when your intestines are inflamed, the bacteria cannot grow on the inflamed area as well. And that bacteria is so important that if we got rid of all the bacteria, we would not live as long. I'll give you some interesting studies. They studied that when a child prior to age 1, right, so from birth to 12 months old, in that time frame, one bout of antibiotics, which kills bacteria, doubles their lifetime risk of diabetes. That's how impactful the bacteria is in our system. So when we eat Roundup, it's constantly inflaming our intestines, causing death in the absolutely necessary bacteria we need to absorb nutrients, to make all kinds of healthy stuff for us to function and be at our best. That's one effect. The other is, when your gut is inflamed, your gut, your intestines are designed to keep like undigested food and eventually poop inside it until you let it out. Well, if it's inflamed, the undigested food and the poop leaks out into the rest of your body, right? So now you have these contaminants that are leaking out of your intestines, going throughout your body, and your immune system is freaking out. It's like, oh my God, what's happening, right? So your immune system, remember Pac-Man? It's like Pac-Man going and gobbling up all the little pellets. Well, it's like Pac-Man working overdrive, trying to gobble up all the pellets of these contaminants within our system. Well, if Pac-Man is gobbling up all those things, what is it not doing, right? What is its normal job? Well, it's supposed to be killing cancer cells. It's supposed to be helping you reduce inflammation. It's supposed to be normalizing some of your dead cells. It gets rid of dead cells, because if you have a dead cell that's laying around and it doesn't get removed, the healthy cells around the dead cells start to die as well, right? It's actually one of the mechanisms of aging, right? One of 7. And so when this is happening, right, you have more inflammation, you're aging faster, and your cancer risk does increase, okay? And so very important for you to minimize any grain intake into your system, because when all that's inflamed, inflammation is very sticky. The chemicals of inflammation causes stickiness, and your intestine sits right against the muscles right in the front of your hips. So when those muscles touch inflammation, they get all sticky. Guess what happens? Your body starts to stick and you walk like this eventually, right? That's the biological and mechanical intersection of why this is all, for most people, so tight, right, that I'm seeing, right? So that is the biological aspect of this. Now, to tie in biology, aside from just not eating grains, I call it implementing the core values of food. People always ask me what diet to eat. Well, I say don't eat any diet. A diet is a tool. I want you to make healthy food choices for the rest of your life, right? This comes back to word choice. And so the healthy food choice for the rest of your life is about the relationship with food. Like anything, it's a relationship with the thing, not the thing in itself, right? And so what are the 3 core values of a sound relationship with food? I keep it simple. Eat the rainbow, right? Which is eat colorful foods. Don't eat always green, always white, always blue. You want to eat a variety of colors each week. Within the week, eat a variety of colors. That's 1. 2 is 80-20. If 80% of the time you're eating healthy foods, the other 20%, it's okay, right? Because it's probably not possible to eat 100% healthy all the time. People try to do this. They're called diets. And so no one stays on a diet forever, right? So then people ask me, well, what's a healthy food? Very simple. A healthy food is a food that's never been through a machine. It doesn't have an ingredients list. It didn't come in a box or a bag, right? In other words, it's just like earth, ideally earth to your house. These days, earth to supermarket to your house is maybe your current choice, right? Ideally, earth, like dirt, into your doorstep would be the best. If you could source that, that would be the most incredible. And of course, organic sources. And the last core value is don't judge food as good or bad, right? Any food that you say that is bad for me or bad for you, after you eat it, you feel guilt. And in fact, even shame, somewhere between guilt and shame. And those emotions are more unhealthy for you than the actual biology of the food, right? So this is a great segue into the last reality. The last is energy, right? Because our emotions, right, our feelings affects our energy directly. This is all mapped out, right? So love has a certain vibration frequency, shame has a very low frequency. And so by being mindful of the feelings that we have on a day-to-day basis, we can now optimize our health, right? This is why, from a biology perspective, we don't judge food as bad, because when we eat it, that guilt feeling, that low vibration, promotes more despair, more hopelessness, more illness, more anxiety than any biology, right? Any chemical food, basically. Right? And so being mindful of our emotions. And so if you're thinking, well, what's the actionable? Well, on a moment-to-moment basis, maybe when you're counting, right, 1, 2, 3, 4, tune in to what are you feeling in that moment. It doesn't matter what the feeling is. Most people have learned to tune out their emotions. Just the practice of tuning into the emotion is extremely powerful. It gives you the awareness. Again, there are much deeper practices, and you don't have to worry, you get the full course with the deeper practices, right? In this one, I want you to give you the simple starter practices and to get you to understand why this is so important, right? So tuning in to your emotions is huge, right? Now, that's from a emotional, internal perspective. I'll give you an external perspective as it relates to energy. At night, this is super simple. You want to turn off your Wi-Fi routers, right? Because your Wi-Fi, like all things, is broadcasting, right, a frequency into your environment, and there's studies showing that the Wi-Fi wires are not the most healthy for us, right? So at night, like I have a $12 timer I got from Amazon that says turn off this plug from 11 p.m. to 7 a.m. I plug the Wi-Fi router, our TV, and all that stuff in it, and then I don't set it and forget it. Never had to think about it. Every night, automatically shuts off. Super simple, actionable, to limit the exposure to these vibrations that we know are not healthy for you, right? So just to review, we have 5 different realities, right? We went through the mind, right? About wiggling your finger, right? About being attentive to your word choice. We went through the mechanical body, which is about doing the warrior stretch. We went through the biological body, which is eliminate grains and adopt the 3 core values of food. We went through the environment, which is simply look up your water information and ideally get some type of water replacement filtration system. And then lastly, we just went over energy, right? So when you put all those 5 things in place, they are now addressing the root causes of why a person is not optimized, right? And I'll explain to you what that means. Again, from the beginning, we talked about we are born optimized, right? Just think, when you look at a baby, you don't go, oh, that's horrible. You go, oh my God, it's amazing. Because the moment we're born, we vibrate at the highest, most amazing love frequency, right? No one looks at a baby like, arms too short, legs could be stronger. We don't judge babies. But yet as we grow, as we go through normal life, we're meant to feel the separation and the judgment, and we're meant to feel the hopelessness, the uncertainty, because that allows us to figure out exactly who we are. Every one of those tough times is a magical breadcrumb for us to reveal exactly who we are meant to be going forward. We just don't see it in that moment. When my wife almost was dying, I wasn't like, this is so magical, I get to realize my life purpose. It wasn't until I looked back, right? When I grew up poor and I'd like pick from trash or stuff, I was like, this is amazing. It wasn't until I looked back. So no matter what uncertainty, no matter what chaos that you're experiencing in life, that you're seeing not only in your own life, in other people's, trust that that is exactly what is meant for you and for them to experience. And so there's one obstacle towards that. If our system, if our brain and our health is so suppressed, right? We have all these chemicals, we're so inflamed, we're so energetically wasted and drained, we don't have the ability to see the magic in these breadcrumbs. This is why this session about restoring not only your immunity but your well-being is about restoring your ability to see the magic in your life. Here's what happens. Not only on the surface, as you restore your immunity and your health, you're going to be like, oh my God, I feel so much better. Guess what happens to those around you? Versus, life is horrible. How do people act and feel around you? How we are on the inside directly influences how people are around us, right? There's a saying, as above, so below. What's within us, how we feel, directly influences the external world around us. And so, remember I said about sometimes we don't realize how powerful and influential we can be? Well, as you act on this session's actionables, and as you take the course I'm going to give you, as you optimize and restore yourself, you're literally casting a pebble in a lake. And the ripple effects of this, you may not yet know, but I guarantee you in months and years to come, you're going to look back and go, oh my God, I cannot believe how much of a difference I was able to make just by revealing, attending, restoring myself, right? Because sometimes we're tricked into thinking we must do external stuff to make a difference, and we sacrifice ourselves for the external. We're not taught, no, we attend to ourself, right? Someone told me a word called self-ing. When we attend to ourself and we restore the self, we literally broadcast this amazingness out into the world, right? That is like the light bulb that's kind of like flickering, trying to help other light bulbs. Well, maybe the light bulb, as you fully brighten your own bulb, all the other bulbs can see much better. That is the vision that I have for you. That is the vision that I wish for you. That is the vision I know is possible as you take action on this, because this is, after all, the Global Hope Summit. And I honor you for being on this session. And I know that as you put this into practice, you can be the greatest light bulb in your house, in your community, or in the world that is up for you to decide.
All right, guys, that was Steve Young, and we went a little long there, but I wanted to make sure we got all that great information. And we're going to jump right from here. We're going to take a quick 1-minute break, and then I'll be back with the final talk of the night with Eric.